I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Gordon Goldsborough. I'm presently the president of the Manitoba Historical Society, and I love opportunities to talk about history, and particularly Manitoba history. So on this beautiful sunny afternoon, at least I hope it's sunny there in Brandon, it's certainly wonderful here in Winnipeg, that I can share a little bit about some of the things that I have seen in my travels. One of my good fortunes is that I've been able to see a lot of Manitoba, and I'm going to share some of that with you today. When Eileen first contacted me about doing the presentation, she asked if I would sort of focus on southwestern Manitoba, and I will, for the most part. There is, however, right at the end, a little bit of additional material, and there's also going to be a take-home quiz, so be prepared for that. Before I get underway, though, before I talk about the meat of the presentation, I think I should give you just a little bit of an introduction to my organization, because some of you may not be fully aware of the Manitoba Historical Society. You may not know, for example, that it was founded in 1879, which means that it is the second oldest historical society in all of Canada. In fact, the only society that is older is the one in Nova Scotia, and it's only older by 1 year. So I think that's pretty impressive. It says that here in Manitoba, we have been proud of our history for a very long time. The Historical Society does a lot of different things. The objectives that I'm listing you here are sort of our formal ones that you can see on our official reports. But I thought I'd just give you a little bit of oversight of just some of the things that we do in the Historical Society. One is that we provide awards in various ways. So, for example, we work with the Lieutenant Governor of Manitoba to recognize people around the province who are doing wonderful work. Each year, at least 3 or sometimes as many as 5 people receive the Lieutenant Governor Awards for historical preservation and promotion. Some of you may even be familiar with this program. Unfortunately, it's been postponed this year. If any of you are wondering what's happening, normally the awards are presented around Manitoba Day in May, but because of the restrictions on our movement right now, the Lieutenant Governor felt that it was appropriate for us to postpone it. So we're hopeful that there will be an announcement soon, but I really can't say much more than that. The announcement will be made by Her Honor. Likewise, an announcement we hope will be made soon is about the Margaret McWilliams Book Awards. This is one of the oldest book awards in Canada. It's conferred for excellence in writing about Manitoba's past. And each year, a wonderful collection of books are nominated. This year, there are 13 books in the running. There are only going to be able to be 3 or possibly as many as 4 awards. This year, for the very first year, there are cash prizes attached to the McWilliams Awards. And we anticipate that the announcement of those will be made within the next 3 weeks. In fact, the jury is meeting tomorrow, and we're hoping they will confirm the list of award winners. We also confer awards for entities that have been in operation for over 100 years, for businesses, for farms, for anything that isn't a business or a farm. So, church congregations, schools, you name it, there are awards for those. And then in the farm category, because of course we have farms that have been operating for much more than 100 years, we now have 125-year awards for those too. So a number of award categories, and there's a few others that I haven't mentioned here too. We also are very active in publication. In fact, our record for publishing goes back to the 1880s, when we published what were called the Transactions of the Manitoba Historical Society. Today, our current publication is called Prairie History. Some of you may be familiar with its predecessor called Manitoba History. We published it up until the end of 2019. We relaunched it in 2020 with a broadened geographic mandate. Now it covers the entire prairies. It covers Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta. It even covers the U.S. borderlands. And we're hoping that you will enjoy it. We're hoping that many of you who perhaps aren't aware of the journal might wish to have a look at it. It's available currently at retail in places like McNally Robinson in Winnipeg and in Saskatoon. It's also available in a bookstore in Edmonton. We're hoping we can get it carried in more retail outlets, but you can also subscribe to it as well. At least 72 pages. And in fact, the most recent issue shown here, that one just to the left of the text, that's the most recent one. It is the largest issue we have ever produced at 100 pages. all original content. In other words, unlike some historical magazines, we don't recycle stuff from other sources. It's all original, and some of it is peer-reviewed. In other words, it's professional grade history by academic historians. A lot of it's popular history as well. There's heritage news. I'm a bit biased when I say this, but I think it's a truly outstanding magazine that pretty much anyone would enjoy, no matter what your interest in the realm of history. And of course, we produce a website. Our website grows literally day by day. In fact, I was just tweaking it minutes before I went on to do this presentation. It consists presently at over 27,000 pages and many thousands of images along with it. We get thousands of visitors each year to visit our website, most of which I'm proud to say come from Canada. And I'm also proud to say that it seems to track the school year, which suggests to me that the traffic, the people who visit our website, a lot of them are students and teachers, and that's wonderful. We aim to be a source of good, reliable, authoritative, and detailed information about Manitoba's past. So I won't go into all the detail about what you can see on our website. Some of you may have already explored it, but I will want to focus today on one specific area of our website, and that's an interactive map of historic places. So if you go to this address that I'm showing on the screen right now, mhs.mb.ca/map2, 2 is the number 2, you will get to our interactive map. And what I'm showing you here are 2 versions of the map that will configure themselves automatically depending on what sort of a device you're using. So whether you're using a desktop computer, whether you're using a laptop, a tablet, or a smartphone, you'll be able to see this map. And in the case when you've got a lot of screen real estate, then you can see a little bit more. When you've got a little less space, you get a little bit less, but it's all still there. So what you see, for example, on the left-hand side, there's a map showing symbols, and each of those symbols relates to a particular kind of site. There is a list of the descriptions that describe each of those symbols on the map. And on the right-hand side is a search interface where you can essentially ask the map to show you whatever you might find interesting. So you can put in keywords, you can put in the specific parts of the province, you can even put in all sorts of metadata that might relate to specific interests, and it'll show you on the map. And then each of those symbols you can tap on either with your finger or with a mouse, and it will give you more information. And so presently, this map, as of last night, consists of 8,447 places around Manitoba. And there's really quite a wide range of places, most of which are outside of Winnipeg. And I make that point specifically. I always want to zing my fellow residents here in Winnipeg, because many of them are woefully ignorant of what's beyond the perimeter highway. And of course, I'm a child of rural Manitoba myself. I'm proud of it. And I want other people to get out and see the province that I have seen. Now, some of you know that I have been talking about these historic sites for a few years on the radio. I have a weekly column on CBC Radio 1, Sunday morning. I think it's presently at 7:45, and it's called Abandoned Manitoba. I've been doing it now for a little over 6 years, and the idea is that each week I talk about a place around the province and something about it, a little bit of the backstory. Many of these places are abandoned. Many of them have a story to tell, and that's the story I want to tell. So, for example, this week, I'm talking about an abandoned log cabin, and it tells the story of the provincial parks in Manitoba. And so if you tune in tomorrow morning, or if you check out the Manitoba Historical Society website later in the day, where we have audio files of all the past episodes, you can check out a little bit about what it's about. But starting in 2016, I started to do books quite unexpectedly. I published a book based upon the radio series. It was called Abandoned Manitoba, and it greatly exceeded my expectations. Never thought it was going to do as well as it's done. In fact, I have to say to you today that, in fact, the book is now out of print. The publisher has exhausted their supply, at least for the time being. They don't anticipate printing more. What you can do if you're interested, though, is buy the sequel that came out 2 years later. In 2018, the book More Abandoned Manitoba came out. And I'm proud to say it also did very, very well. In fact, it became the McNally Robinson Book of the Year in 2019. So on the basis of that success, I've decided that I think there's at least enough stories left in me to do one more book. And for those of you who may be interested, I'm working on it now. I don't think it'll probably be out next year simply because of the limitations imposed by the pandemic on doing research. One of the things you may know if you've seen my books is that I like to tell detailed stories. And to get those details, I often have to dig deep in archives, in libraries, in the field. And I just simply can't do that if I am prevented from traveling. So the reality is I'll probably not produce that book until 2023 at the earliest, but the working title of the book is On the Road to Abandoned Manitoba. And if all works out well, what you're seeing right now will be something resembling the cover of that book. This is actually a picture of my good friend Don Wage. He owns a Model T Ford, a 1926. And last summer, we went out to the rural municipality of Portage-la-Prairie and got a whole bunch of pictures of Don driving his T around the countryside, including over this nice old bowstring arch bridge that is north of Oakville, Manitoba. Now, the reason why I have this on the cover, hopefully, is that it's to emphasize that the premise of the book is that you can go out and travel on the roads of Manitoba and see all kinds of interesting stuff. But I'm not just talking about any particular roads. I'm talking about roads that maybe you have never driven before. I'm talking about some of the abandoned roads of Manitoba. So one of the things I'm doing right now, in fact, are mapping the routes of the original highways in Manitoba. What I'm showing you here is, in fact, a map from 1930. I've superimposed it over Google Earth, just so you can kind of see some of the landforms of Manitoba. And you can see, for example, the red line, which is the original route of the Trans-Canada Highway. Of course, it didn't follow the route that it does today. It went through places like Whitemouth and Beausejour and High Bluff along its way to the Saskatchewan border. And I'm hoping that if all works out well, Don and I are going to drive the original route of the Trans-Canada sometime this summer in his Model T. We're going to drive the old highways in an old car. Now, what I'm going to do then is to talk about some of the highlights that you can find on this interactive map of Manitoba on the Manitoba Historical Society website, focusing on some general categories. So I'm going to show you first a little bit of the map. And here, what I've done is I've asked the map to show me bridges. If you know me, you know that I'm really passionate about bridges, mainly, I think, because they made possible the lifestyle that we enjoy today. They made possible the ability to get in your car and drive pretty much anywhere you want to go, blissfully unaware that you may be crossing rivers along the way. Bridges, of course, cross waterways. And so here is a sampling of the bridges we've visited, not by all means all of them, but certainly the ones in Westman. And one of my particular favorites, I have lots of favorites, I'm afraid, but one of my particular favorites is the nice old bridge just north of the village of Margaret in western Manitoba. Here is an archival photo of it, taken in 1917 as the bridge was being constructed. I love the picture, not only just because it shows the bridge, but it shows how they were preparing the approaches to the bridge. You can see they've dug away some soil there in the background to make access to the bridge. You know, they obviously had to do an awful lot of work, and this was all done, of course, before they had modern equipment, you know, big earth-moving machines, for example, all done with manual labor. The thing that I also find fascinating is that this neat old bridge is still present. It's not used anymore. In fact, this is a picture that I took of it about 5 years ago. And the bridge you can see there in the top, it's showing a little worse for wear. It's got a few missing balustrades of its walls, of its fences. In fact, the one on the far side is actually missing a whole lot more. You can see the magnificent curved arch underneath it. And you can also see that there's actually a second bridge underneath the first one. there's a little, what's called a box culvert bridge underneath, which I suspect means they didn't quite anticipate the kind of volume of water that could flow through the creek here in the springtime. Of course, anyone who's visited Manitoba in the spring knows we often have a heck of a lot of water running off the landscape. And I think the engineers who first designed the bridge didn't fully anticipate the volume of water they'd have to deal with in the spring. So they built one bridge, then they built a bigger bridge over top. So that's one of my favorites. Another one, I have to say, I am not clear whether or not it still exists. In fact, some of you may know better. It's one of the bridges leading into Verdon off the Trans-Canada Highway. It was actually closed and condemned in 2014, 7 years ago. But as recently as 1 year ago, it was still there. I always check it when I'm out in the Verdon areas to see if it's still there. Another beautiful arch bridge. You can see the nice arch curving underneath it. Again, you can see that it's suffered a little bit of damage through the years. And apparently the premise is that they're going to be taking it out and replacing it with a new bridge. Speaking of removing old historic bridges, here's another bridge that I fear is going to be gone soon. This is a bridge not far from the village of Holmfield near Killarney. Built in 1925, it's one of the most distinctive bridges. I don't think there's another one like it at all anywhere in Manitoba. And unfortunately, the plan of the Provincial Highways Department is to take it out because it simply isn't sufficient for the big truck traffic that's going down the highway here anymore. I have urged the department to consider building the new bridge beside the old bridge so that they don't have to take out the old bridge. In fact, it would be a nice thing to keep, perhaps as part of a walking trail. And I'm hopeful they may be receptive to that. I've sent a letter to the Minister of Highways. I so far haven't had the courtesy of a reply, but I'm hopeful. Another bridge that is abandoned is this one. This is just a little bit west of Souris along the original route of Highway number 2. As you can see, if you look closely, it isn't possible to cross this bridge anymore because the approaches have been washed away. But the bridge itself is still in wonderful condition. And the thing that I always find quite striking about this particular bridge is the fact that the two graceful arches are bright orange. Now, if any of you listened to my weekly series, you might recall that a few weeks ago, I talked about this phenomenon. I talked about the reason why things like this tend to be orange. The reason is that it's the growth of what's called a coprophilous lichen. Now, lichen is a type of organism. It's a living thing made up of fungus and algae. Here's a close-up picture of what it looks like. And you can see it's bright orange. And it seems to thrive most where the levels of nutrients are highest. And the reason why that tends, therefore, to occur on things like the tops of bridges, like this one, or the tops of gravestones, or the tops of, well, a whole lot of things, is that that's where birds tend to perch. And of course, the birds tend to poop. And that leaves nutrients that the lichen really likes. So you can pretty much guarantee that when you see this orange lichen, it's a place where birds tend to roost. So that's one category of my interest, some of the bridges. Okay, so here's another view of that map. And this time I've asked the map to show me the locations of grain elevators. You probably know, if you know me at all, that I am passionate about grain elevators. The fact that, people perceive them to be all over the landscape when in fact they are not, when in fact they are increasingly rare because they're being demolished at an alarming rate. In fact, this year alone, there's at least 4 that have been demolished. But there are some beautiful ones still standing. So one of my, again, personal favorites is this one near the railway siding that used to be called Cameron. The railway is gone. In fact, if you look really closely in this photo, you could perhaps make out the railway route through the farmer's field. It's now gone. The railway's been taken out, but there's still sort of evidence of the old right-of-way. And of course, the grain elevator's still there. The farmer, for reasons known only to themselves, has chosen to still just crop around the elevator. It is starting to deteriorate, unfortunately. I was there to see it last summer, and its drive shed has now collapsed. It wasn't quite that point when I took this picture a few years ago, but it's now really starting to show its age. It's actually, as far as I know, the second oldest remaining grain elevator in Manitoba. Thanks to my friend Bill Warren, who lives at Pearson, he shared this photo of the elevators there. And of course, the elevator is no longer. You can see it's already starting to come down. They were taking some of the metal cladding off it so that they could reuse it. But unfortunately, the elevators are now gone. And in fact, Bill tells me one of the downsides is that now it's a whole lot noisier when the train goes through town, because the elevators used to muffle the sound. And of course, without them there, the sound just rings through Pearson. I want to show you this historic photo of Niverville because it illustrates what I call the three generations of grain handling structures in Manitoba. On the extreme right-hand side, you see a circular granary that it actually looks a lot like some of the granaries that farmers use today, you know, the steel granaries. As far as we know, this is the original grain storage structure that was built by a fellow named William Hespeler. We believe it was built in 1878, and it was the first of its kind in Western Canada. In the center is what's called the standard plan elevator. Standard plan basically because it was built according to some standard specifications, and that's the one that I think pretty much everybody thinks of when they think of the storage of grain on the prairies. On the left-hand side is probably a building that very few people have ever seen. It's called a flat warehouse, and the rationale was that farmers with wagons loads of grain would bring them up a ramp. And in fact, you can see that ramp on the side of the building. They'd bring the wagon up the ramp to the middle. They would have in their wagon would either have sacks of grain or they might even have loose grain. It would then be shoveled out or carried out into the flat warehouse where it would be stored. And then on the opposite side of the flat warehouse, there would be a train would come with bring boxcars, and then they would reverse the process. They would either scoop the loose grain or they'd carry the sacks of grain into the boxcar. Highly labor intensive and therefore very slow compared to the standard plan. And so when the standard plan elevators began to be built, they very quickly made these flat warehouses obsolete. And therefore, that's why very few people have ever seen a flat warehouse, because they've mostly all been torn down in favor of the standard plan elevators. There is, however, still one flat warehouse, as far as we know, standing in Manitoba at Brookdale, northeast of Brandon. This is how it looks. It's not in bad condition structurally, although its foundation is starting to give way a bit. And I'm pleased to report to you that the Manitoba Agricultural Museum at Austin, you know, where they host the Threshermen's Reunion, is planning to move this last remaining flat warehouse to the museum and to restore it as an exhibit on the history of grain storage. If anyone's interested in knowing about it, there is more information on the website of the Manitoba Agricultural Museum. But while we're on the subject of grain storage, another facet that is interesting to me is the family storage. In other words, the on-farm storage of grain, what we could call family elevators. And there are many of them around the landscape yet. My good friend Jean McManus has been tracking them, and she has over 100 of them so far. I'm not anywhere close to Jean's count. I've only visited about a dozen of these family elevators, but I have seen this one west of Melita that was built originally in 1911 by the Olmsted family. It's really quite interesting for at least one reason, is that it uses a pneumatic system to elevate the grain to the top. Unlike the standard plan elevators that use what's called a leg, this one actually uses air to push the grain through a pipe in many of the same ways that farmers do today. In fact, people often think that, you know, this is a new innovation, pneumatic transport of grain, when in fact it's a technology that goes back over 100 years, demonstrated by this little family elevator. And another one that I'm quite pleased with is this one north of Verdon, the former Scallion family elevator. It may well be the oldest remaining elevator in Manitoba of all kinds. This one was built in 1893, as you can see, made with field stones, and it's still in reasonably good condition. Changing the map again, this time in favor of historic churches. And of course, they're all over the landscape. Some of them are still active, some of them, well, not so much. So one of my favorites again is the one at Copley down near Lyleton, sometimes referred to as the Bootleggers Church, because allegedly at one time during Prohibition in the US, the bootleggers would use it to store their liquor. Then they could sneak it across the US border to sell it in the United States. It's been unused for many, many decades. And in fact, there was a fire that burned away all of its wooden parts, but the walls are still standing for the most part. And it's a nice, quiet, sort of contemplative place to visit if you ever have an opportunity to visit that corner of the province. One that my friends all love is the Palmerston United Church north of Lenore, that they always remark on how amazingly well balanced it is. Balanced in the sense that most of its foundation has given away, but for reasons known only to the building, it's still standing. Every time one of my friends goes to visit it, they send me an email saying, Palmerston is still standing. We expect one of these days, one critical stone is going to fall, and then the whole church will come carting over, and it will be gone. Too bad, because it's a nice little old church. Another one of my favorites is this one, northwest of Oak Lake, the Salem Methodist Church, again, made from field stones, and was in remarkably good condition the last time I went to visit, although its roof is looking a little shabby. It probably needs a replacement, but the walls, I can imagine they're going to stay standing for many more years, as long as the municipality keeps its hands off. Unfortunately, a few years ago, the RM of Woodworth decided they were going to tear down a lot of the old abandoned buildings, and luckily they were somehow prevailed upon not to take down this little old church, but many of the other ones in the now RM of Wallace Woodworth are on the chopping block. And of course, many of those churches have associated with them cemeteries, but in some cases, there is no church. It is simply a cemetery, a burial ground for one type or another. And of course, I love visiting cemeteries and wandering through them, looking at the various markers to tell you, of course, the history of the local community. It tells you things like the ethnicity of the people that live there based upon the names you see. It tells you when they have momentous events like major, pandemics that pass through and caused a number of people to pass away. All sorts of useful information can be conveyed by the markers. But among them, there are others that are especially poignant and don't always have markers. So, of course, in the last couple of weeks, we've been hearing a lot about some of the cemeteries that are not so well respected. So, for instance, this one near Elkhorn, the cemetery that was used for a number of years for the residential school in Elkhorn, where children who passed away at that cemetery, passed away at the school, were buried. Unfortunately, with little or no documentation, in 1990, some former students of the school, some former staff of the school, erected these crosses, at least of some reminder of the young people who were buried there. And of course, the other one that should be, of course, near and dear to the hearts of Brandonites is the one at the Brandon Residential School, which, thanks to Brandonite Catherine Nichols, is much better documented now than it was. Unfortunately, still not as thoroughly as it could be. Catherine has been able to document at least a number of graves outside the fence surrounding the cemetery, which tells us then there are more burials than what there are records to document. I will, in passing, also note you the Xanthoria lichen, that Coprophilus lichen, living on top of this monument. Any place where birds roost. Switching again to historic schools. Of course, I tend to be interested in schools because of my own background in education. And there are many schools around southwestern Manitoba, either schools that are still in use or schools that are no longer in use and are abandoned. So one of the ones that I particularly am impressed by is the former school in Melita. Fortunately, it's been turned into the local museum. It's a magnificent building. It's a magnificent museum. I heartily recommend anyone who hasn't visited it to do so. Not only for the collections, they have wonderful collections in a number of areas, but simply to admire a beautifully preserved early example. In fact, I think this may be the earliest consolidated school still standing in rural Manitoba. Beautiful example from 1893. Or the Unola School west of Milita. It's been preserved, and someone has seen fit to re-equip it as though it might have been in use. You can stand or sit inside the Unola School and imagine that you're attending a one-room schoolhouse. In fact, I always wonder, if I were a school teacher, why I wouldn't want to take my kids on a bus tour to a place like this and actually do a class, spend the day living like kids attending a one-room schoolhouse. I think kids would enjoy that. If nothing else, it would give them an appreciation for what they have in their modern schools. Unfortunately, they don't all look like the Unola School. Here's one that isn't quite as well preserved. This one is southwest of Ninette, the former Butrum School. And as you can see, it has been used in the past for a variety of things. It was used for a while as a granary, and it closed in 1965. It's got some significant damage. It's, of course, got big holes in the floor. It's probably going to be torn down. If not, just nature will take its course. And then there's a whole lot of other things. When we started building this map, we couldn't fully anticipate the diversity of places that we would find to put on the map. And so we came up with a sort of a miscellaneous category that has had to fill in for a whole lot of different things. This is a map showing all of the things in the map in southwestern Manitoba. It gives you an idea of just how much you can see if you go out and travel. So I'll just give you just a few of what I think are some of the highlights. Starting in Melita. In the cemetery just west of town, there is a winter storage vault. Of course, at one time, if you died during the winter, they couldn't dig in the frozen ground. They would then store the body in this little storage vault. It's 2-story. In fact, when I was visiting it back in 2018, the person happened to be there who did the digging for the graves, and she told me that yes, they still in fact use the winter storage vault. This particular one built in 1907, probably one of the earlier ones around the province. This, of course, is the engine house at Reston, built, of course, at a time when they used steam locomotives for moving railway around. And in this case, they had a service facility for the locomotives. There used to be a roundabout in front of it so that they could turn the locomotives. Since back in the 1960s, it's been used for a variety of other purposes. To my knowledge, it's used simply for private storage today, and it's only one of 3 remaining engine houses in Manitoba, the other 2 being at Dauphin and the Paw. And of course, if you visit Griswold, you can admire the old ice rink in Griswold that was used for skating and hockey into the 1980s. The thing that I particularly draw attention to here are the laminated roof trusses that were used probably and put in here in the 1940s, conceivably made by the firm of the Dring brothers from Boissevain. They were pioneers in the construction of these laminated wood beams. They pioneered the use of what are called glulam, and that are nearly as strong as steel. And you can still to this day find all over the province in all sorts of hockey rinks, skating rinks, curling rinks, churches, you name it. These glulams are used widely. And this may be one of the early examples of the use of glulam in this old rink, which is unfortunately looking pretty shabby these days. Now, I did say that I wasn't going to confine myself entirely to southwestern Manitoba, because I want to end the presentation with a little bit of additional material that you may not know too much about. So here I am. This picture was taken only about 4 weeks ago. One of the things that I will draw your attention to, those of you who know me, is that I'm not looking quite the way I normally look. I guess decided to go a little bit shabby myself. When the pandemic was declared, I decided to use my razor, and as a result, I've got a beard growing that I originally thought might only grow a few months until the pandemic was over. Never anticipating that it would be still on well over a year later. So I don't know how long the beard is going to get, but that's my premise: is that as soon as the pandemic is over, the beard comes off. Well, here I am climbing down into what appears to be a culvert that has a few things sticking out the side of it. This is on the west side of Lake Winnipeg, north of Hecla Island, in fact, north of Grindstone Point. It's what's called a fallout reporting post. Now, the premise of this is that during the Cold War, during the early 1960s, the Canadian government was worried about the potential impact if there was a nuclear detonation somewhere in Canada or even somewhere close by in the United States. Of course, this was a very tense time. There was, the possibility that the Americans or the Soviets would launch a nuclear strike. And of course, Canada, being kind of cut in the middle, might have to evacuate vast areas. So the federal government resolved to build a network of sites across the country where they could monitor radiation levels. So they were going to build 2,000 of these places across the country, 200 of them in Manitoba, these fallout reporting posts. And the idea would be that somebody would be left behind, one or two people would stay behind to monitor the levels of radiation, and then they would radio the results to some central clearinghouse where they would then take all those individual measurements, put them on a map, and then they could coordinate the evacuations. If they saw there was radiation coming from a particular direction, they could then have people evacuate in the opposite direction. Well, we don't know how many of the 200 of these devices were built in Manitoba and how many of them are still standing today. What I can tell you is that we have been looking for them quite diligently for the last few months, and we have found 8 so far. So here I am climbing down a ladder into one of them, and this is what it looked like about 2 years ago when one of my former students, Elise Watchorn, visited. When I was there a few weeks ago, someone had lit one of those mattresses that you can see on fire. The mattresses, of course, were there for the people who were left behind so they could sleep in this structure. It's below ground. It's actually not too far below ground. It's probably only about 3 or 4 feet below ground. It had some shelving on the left-hand side there. You can see that. That's where they would store their supplies. And then they would take measurements of the radiation in the air and then say radio them on. Now, this one, as you can see, is pretty thoroughly damaged with graffiti. It's got some rust damage as well. But a few weeks earlier, I had an opportunity to visit another one down in the southeastern part of the province near Moose Lake Provincial Park. Now, take note of what this one looks like, and you're going to see its almost exact twin from Moose Lake. This is what it looks like. And as you can see, it's in remarkably good condition. Almost looks like it was brand new. You can see that the shelving is still there, not all rusty like the other one. There's no mattresses, but the bed springs are still there. You can even on the wall of the structure see one of the devices used for taking the radiation measurements. Remarkably well preserved. And so we're hoping that this structure might be preserved and either removed to take into a museum so that it can be used as an exhibit, or perhaps left in its original site and used as sort of an interpretation of this period during the 1960s. But I have to tell you, that's only one kind of structure that they built in the early 1960s. This is what they did when there was nothing nearby. There were no buildings nearby. They put it underground. If there were buildings nearby, they then did something like this. This is another one of the fallout reporting posts. This one is in the basement of a government building in Piney, Manitoba. And you can see that there's a walled off corner of the basement, walled off with cinder blocks, and that's where they would do the radiation measurements. So whenever there was a building that was nearby, that was owned by the government, either the provincial or the federal government, they would use it for these radiation monitoring posts. So here is a map of southern Manitoba, and you can see, of course, all of these blue symbols on the map, which denote where they put these fallout reporting posts, these FRPs. There are 28 of them in southwestern Manitoba. Some of them were built in customs offices. Some of them were built in Manitoba Hydro offices. Some of them, well, there was one at the Shiloh military base, post offices, railway stations, RCMP offices, and then there's a few that we don't know about. So there's many more of these yet to be found. And I know a number of people who are out looking for them because it seems like a keen thing to do when you're trying to pass the time during a pandemic. To wrap things up, I want to bring things back to Brandon now to finish up. And of course, remind everybody of the now gone International Harvester building that was at the overpass on the 18th Street Bridge. Built in 1911 as the headquarters for the International Harvester Company, it, of course, stood proudly in Brandon for many years, touting, of course, the local wheat kings. Regrettably, even though I urged them to consider alternatives, the engineers for the government building the additional bridge saw fit to tear it down. And of course, as I think we all know, the bridge is going to go where the building used to stand. Fortunately, somebody saw fit to put a webcam on the in an insurance office nearby, and so I managed to download a whole bunch of pictures as it was coming down to document the process. So too bad that it's gone. I'm hoping that somebody may have salvaged a brick for me. I had several people promise that they would, but I haven't heard for sure if that's happened or not. So unfortunately, that's a little bit of Brandon history gone, I'm afraid. But just a few weeks ago, I visited Brandon. I was walking around Coronation Park near the former Fleming School, and I admired these giant blue spruces in the park. There are at least 21 of them by my count. And at the base of 5 of them, there are some concrete, well, I'm not sure what you'd call them. They kind of look to me like sort of bases for something. And in fact, 3 of them, if you look closely, they have names. So for those of you, of course, who have the connection to the Daly house, the name of George Coldwell should be quite familiar. He, of course, was one of the occupants of Daly House. He lived there from 1896 to 1924. And of course, he was also a prominent lawyer in Brandon. He was the MLA for Brandon for a number of years. When this site, when the park was turned into Coronation Park, when it was when the king was crowned, they changed the name of the park to, it used to be called Jubilee Park. They turned it into Coronation Park to honor the coronation of the king. And they thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to also acknowledge some of the other people around the community? So allegedly, each one of these spruces used to have a monument like this standing in front of it. Now, through time, they have disappeared for one reason or another. There are only 3 of these marble tablets left. One is for Coldwell. Another one is for, I have to forget. I forgot the guy's name. Oh, that's terrible. Third one is for the Canadian Legion. And I'm told, I found a post online where someone said that there might be a list of all of them at Daly House. I checked with Eileen and she said, nope, there was no sign of such a list. That's too bad because it would be nice to know for whom those trees were planted. But, you know, I made this suggestion when I talked about this on my radio program. You know, given that all those big, magnificent spruces are now mature trees, they're gorgeous, and each one of them was planted in memorial of somebody in Brandon, wouldn't it be nice maybe to rename the park again? Instead of Coronation Park, to call it Memorial Park for all of the people who are memorialized by those trees. At the very least, it seems to me they should acknowledge people that the trees were planted in memory of someone so that people know that bit of the story. Well, to wrap things up, I will show you one last picture. Here I am again, pre-pandemic, without the long, shaggy beard. I'm standing on top of what looks like a giant tree stump. It's not a tree stump because it's actually made of concrete, although it was made to look like a tree stump. It stands just south of the Trans-Canada Highway between Haddishville and Richer in southeastern Manitoba. It was revealed a few years ago when the provincial government was doing road maintenance on the Trans-Canada, and it's been there since we think the late 1950s. Unfortunately, that's as much of the story as I'm going to tell you, because this is probably going to be a chapter in my next book. So with that, I'll conclude. I'll thank you for your attention. I'll say that if any of you have an interest in helping with this project to map historic places around the province, whether it's in Westman or anywhere in Manitoba, please feel free to contact me. I'm giving you my email address here, gordon@mhs.mb.ca. Thank you very much.